The first light of a cool autumn morning settled gently over the quiet streets of Millbrook, Virginia. The sidewalks were still damp from an overnight rain, reflecting the warm glow of old-fashioned street lamps that had not yet switched off. Shop owners unlocked their front doors, one by one, arranging signs and sweeping fallen leaves toward the curb. The smell of fresh coffee drifted from the corner cafe, while a local florist carefully placed buckets of white lilies and chrysanthemums outside the entrance, hoping to catch the attention of early customers. It looked like the kind of peaceful American small town where everyone believed they knew one another. A black luxury SUV rolled slowly down Main Street before coming to a smooth stop beside the sidewalk. The engine went silent, and for a brief moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened. A black woman stepped out with quiet confidence. She appeared to be in her early 40s, dressed in a tailored cream-colored coat over a navy blouse, dark slacks, and polished low heels that clicked softly against the pavement. Her hair was neatly pulled back into a simple bun, and a silver watch rested on her wrist. There was nothing flashy about her appearance. Instead, she carried herself with the kind of dignity that could never be bought in a store. She paused beside the vehicle and looked around for a long moment. She simply stood there, taking in the familiar streets she had not seen in nearly 2 decades. The old bakery still had its faded blue awning. The courthouse clock still chimed every 15 minutes. Even the giant oak tree across from the town square stood exactly where she remembered, its branches stretching across the sidewalk like old arms welcoming. Another season, a quiet smile crossed her face. Some places never truly leave your heart, no matter how far life carries you. Her name was Frances Bennett. Very few people walking those streets that morning would have recognized her. The shy teenager who had once lived in Millbrook had long since grown into a woman, shaped by discipline, sacrifice, and years of service. She had traveled farther than most people in town could imagine, carrying responsibilities that demanded courage under pressure and calm in moments when others lost control. Yet she had returned without an escort, without announcements, and without expecting anyone to notice. Today was not about recognition. Today was about remembrance. She opened the rear door of the sub and carefully removed a bouquet of fresh white lilies. They had been her father's favorite flowers. As she held them gently against her coat, memories returned with surprising clarity. Her father had spent more than 30 years working as a maintenance employee inside the county courthouse. He never wore an expensive suit. He never held an important title. Yet everyone who truly knew him remembered his kindness, an unwavering belief that a person's character mattered far more than their position. When Frances was a little girl, he often walked her through these same streets before school. People may judge your skin before they hear your voice, he would tell her with a calm smile. You can't control their hearts, but you can always control your own. Those words had followed her throughout her entire life. Whenever someone underestimated her, whenever someone questioned whether she belonged, whenever someone expected anger instead of grace, she remembered her father's advice: stand tall, stay respectful, let your character speak louder than your emotions. Frances tightened her grip on the flowers and slowly began walking toward the town cemetery several blocks away. She noticed familiar buildings that time had barely touched, but she also noticed the eyes. A few strangers glanced at her for a second longer than necessary. An elderly man looked up from his newspaper before returning to his coffee. 2 construction workers paused their conversation as she passed. None of it surprised her. She understood that first impressions often came long before first conversations. Still, she refused to let assumptions define her day. She greeted an older woman walking a golden retriever with a warm smile. "Good morning." The woman smiled politely. "Morning." A young boy riding his bicycle, slow just enough to admire the bouquet before pedaling away towards school. For a brief moment, the morning felt peaceful. The kind of peace that reminded Frances why America had always been at its best when ordinary people chose kindness over suspicion, respect over fear, and understanding over judgment. She reached the corner where the florist displayed rows of fresh flowers outside the shop, the scent of lilies mixed with crisp autumn air as she carefully examined another arrangement, hoping to add a few white chrysanthemums before continuing to her father's grave. Across the street, a marked police cruiser sat parked near the curb. Inside, a veteran white police officer looked up from his coffee and fixed his eyes on the elegantly dressed black woman standing alone beside the flower stand, His expression hardened as he opened the driver's door and stepped onto the sidewalk. Officer Daniel Brooks crossed Main Street with slow, deliberate steps, his polished boots striking the pavement in a steady rhythm. His patrol uniform was pressed neatly, his badge gleamed in the morning sunlight, and his duty belt carried every symbol of the authority. To him, people in Millbrook noticed when Officer Brooks walked by. Some nodded respectfully, others quietly looked away, hoping not to become the focus of his attention. A police badge represented responsibility, integrity, and public trust. But like every position of authority, it depended on the character of the person wearing it. Frances Bennett noticed him approaching before he spoke. She turned with the same calm expression she had carried since arriving in town, the bouquet of white lilies resting gently in her hands. "Good morning, officer," she said politely. Brooks stopped a few feet away, studying her from head to toe. His eyes moved from her tailored coat to the rental SUV parked along the curb before returning to her face. "You visiting someone?" "He asked my father's grave," Frances answered softly. There was no hesitation in her voice, only quiet honesty. Instead of acknowledging her answer, Brooks folded his arms across his chest. "Mind showing me some identification?" Frances had learned long ago that respectful cooperation often prevented unnecessary conflict. Without arguing or questioning his request, she carefully set the bouquet on the flower stand and reached into her handbag. Of course, she handed him her driver's license with both hands. Brooks accepted it but barely looked at the card. His attention remained fixed on Frances herself, almost as though he had already formed an opinion before asking a single question. "You don't look familiar. I grew up here. I've worked this town for years." "I've been away for a long time." Several customers browsing flowers glanced toward the conversation before returning to their shopping. Nothing appeared unusual. It looked like an ordinary interaction between a police officer and a citizen. Frances remained patient. She understood that law enforcement officers carried difficult responsibilities every day. Most officers serve their communities with courage and professionalism, making difficult decisions under pressure. She believed deeply that mutual respect between police officers and citizens made neighborhoods safer for everyone. She also believed respect had to travel both directions. Brooks continued staring at her license. "You say you grew up here?" "Yes, Cedar Street." He raised one eyebrow. "Cedar Street. My father lived there his entire life." Brooks handed the license back but did not step aside. "What brings you back now?" "Today is the anniversary of my father's passing." For the briefest moment, silence settled between them. The answer could have ended the conversation. Instead, Brooks looked toward the expensive rental vehicle. "That's your SUV, yes. Mind if I take a look inside?" Frances answered with the same calm tone. "Officer, is there a reason you need to search my vehicle?" His expression changed almost immediately. "So you're refusing?" "I'm asking whether there's a legal reason." The distinction was simple. Refusing and asking for clarification were not the same thing. A middle-aged man leaving the coffee shop slowed his pace as he overheard the exchange across the street. Two college students waiting for the crosswalk signal quietly looked over. Brooks took one step closer. "You ask a lot of questions. I believe communication helps avoid misunderstandings." His jaw tightened. "You got an attitude?" Frances met his eyes without raising her voice. "No, sir, you sure sound like you've got one." "I'm simply answering your questions honestly." The florist, arranging another bucket of chrysanthemums, paused his work for a moment. The atmosphere had changed, not dramatically, just enough for people nearby to sense that something felt different. Frances could feel it too. She had experienced difficult conversations before in offices, airports, military facilities, and public buildings across the country. Experience had taught her that emotions often escalated situations, while patience sometimes prevented them. She remembered her father's voice: "Stay respectful. Stay calm. Never let someone else's anger become your own." Brooks glanced once more at the rental vehicle before looking back at Frances. "You know," he said slowly, "people around here notice strangers. I understand, and folks report anything suspicious. I appreciate neighbors looking out for one another, but they also expect cooperation. You've had mine from the beginning." For a second, neither of them spoke. The breeze carried a few autumn leaves across the sidewalk. A church bell echoed somewhere in the distance. Frances reached toward the bouquet she had set down moments earlier, intending to continue on her way to the cemetery. Before her fingers touched the flowers, Brooks abruptly stepped forward and knocked the bouquet from the stand. The white lilies scattered across the wet pavement, their delicate petals spreading across the sidewalk as nearby pedestrians froze in stunned silence. The bouquet struck the sidewalk with a soft thud, and white lilies scattered across the damp pavement. A few petals drifted into the street as passing cars slowed. For a brief moment, the entire block fell silent. Frances looked down at the flowers her father had loved so much. She took a slow breath, then she looked back at Officer Brooks. Her voice remained calm. "You knocked them down." Brooks shrugged without the slightest sign of regret, then picked them up. Frances held his gaze. "I didn't." Those four words carried no anger, no sarcasm, and no disrespect. Only truth. That calm response seemed to frustrate him even more. People often expect conflict to sound loud, but sometimes the strongest resistance is quiet dignity. A woman walking her dog stopped on the opposite sidewalk. Two teenagers waiting outside the coffee shop exchanged uneasy looks. An elderly veteran, sitting on a nearby bench, slowly folded his newspaper, sensing that something wasn't right. Officer Brooks stepped closer, until only inches separated them. "You think you're smarter than me?" Frances answered with complete composure. "I think everyone deserves respect." His face hardened. "You're talking back, no officer. I'm speaking respectfully. The difference mattered. Every good police officer understands that asking questions is not the same as refusing lawful instructions. Respect grows strongest when both citizens and officers treat one another with fairness and professionalism. Unfortunately, pride sometimes speaks louder than wisdom." Brooks glanced around and noticed several people watching. He didn't like having an audience authority. When driven by ego instead of service, often feels threatened by simple honesty. "You know what?" He reached for his handcuffs. "I've had enough." Frances didn't move. "For what reason am I being detained?" "Disorderly conduct." She blinked once. "What disorderly conduct?" "You've been argumentative. I've answered every question you've asked. You can explain that downtown." Without another word, Brooks grabbed her wrist. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The bouquet crushed beneath several shoes as people instinctively stepped backward. Frances did not pull away. She had learned years earlier that panic rarely helps difficult situations. She simply placed one hand behind her back as instructed. "I am not resisting." Brooks twisted her arm harder than necessary. The cold steel handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists. A young mother standing nearby instinctively covered her daughter's eyes. A college student quietly lifted his phone and pressed record. Another followed, then another. Within seconds, cameras appeared from every direction. No one shouted, no one interfered. They simply watched. Because sometimes witnessing the truth becomes the first step toward protecting it. Brooks guided Frances toward his patrol vehicle. She walked without struggle, without fear, without anger. The calm in her eyes confused everyone watching. She looked less like someone who had lost control, and more like someone who understood. That character is revealed most clearly during hardship. As Brooks opened the rear door of the cruiser, Frances paused for just a moment. She looked toward the growing line of phones recording every second. Then she spoke in a voice so steady that several people would later remember it word for word. "Please don't stop recording. Truth deserves witnesses." Those words settled over the crowd. The teenager holding his phone tightened his grip. The elderly veteran slowly stood from his bench. The young mother nodded almost without realizing it. None of them knew who Frances Bennett really was. None of them knew why she had returned to Millbrook. And certainly none of them could imagine that before this day. People throughout the police station would stand in complete silence as they learned exactly who the woman in those handcuffs truly was. Sometimes the greatest strength isn't found in fighting back. Sometimes it's found in refusing to let someone else's actions steal your dignity. A badge earns respect when it is worn with integrity, humility, and service. Every citizen, regardless of race, background, or appearance, deserves to be treated with fairness, compassion, and equal protection under the law. Communities become stronger when trust replaces prejudice, and when justice is guided by truth rather than assumptions. If this story moved you, what would you have done if you had been standing on that sidewalk? Would you have spoken up, started recording, or walked away? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. and tell us what kind of justice and inspirational story you'd like to see next, because your ideas could inspire our next video.